So we're going to begin talking about the five hindrances or the five obstacles to meditation, to developing a meditation practice. These are historical. You find these five mentioned in the sutras, going back to the time of the Buddha. These five very well known obstacles that pop up for people who try to begin and maintain a consistent practice. So, the first of the five obstacles is what is called laziness. So, laziness is basically just not having an interest in actually meditating. It's putting off um, formal practice or finding other things to do rather than engaging in a practice. Um, and there are different forms of laziness from the Buddhist perspective, and they're not all what you might expect, because we might think, oh, I'm not lazy, I'm just really busy. I have a lot of commitments. I have, you know, my job takes up a lot of time and other commitments that I have take up a lot of time. So it's just very difficult. And from the Buddhist perspective, being kind of unwilling to make time in one's life for meditation is actually a form of laziness, even though we are filling that time. We might think laziness is only, being addicted to entertainment or, just binge watching things, that sort of, we all recognize that that might be a form of laziness. But Buddhism would say that if we give so much importance to the demands of our work or our other interests, our hobbies, for example, or just, getting wrapped up in other things, even though we wouldn't say, well, yeah, I'm just sitting on the couch and watching, things a lot. You wouldn't say that you're doing that, but what isn't happening is really being intentional and carving out time and space for practice. And so that is presented as a type of laziness in relation to one's spiritual practice. And so, there certainly is an element of discipline that is necessary because um, the real benefits of a practice will begin to show up if and when practice is really consistent, when it isn't just like, oh, today I feel like it, but, maybe I don't feel like it some other time. And so, it's, of course, in the beginning, we need to be kind to ourselves when we're recognizing that we're starting a new habit, and we're not going to go from 0 to 100, overnight. Um, but over a period of months, we should try to come up with a plan to increase our consistency. And with the goal of getting to a point where we are meditating, at least once a day, if not twice a day, every day. Of course, if we're really sick, if there's a lot of plane travel and so on a given day, then still, of course, we make some exceptions here and there. Um, but we want to try to think about from wherever we are today over the course of the next number of months, trying to get to the point where, um, it's really, really consistent. Because without that consistency, those benefits are really never going to show up. And so, then with inconsistency, then over, in a year or so, we'll be like, well, it doesn't really work. I haven't really seen any results. And so the danger is that we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, stop, and we don't continue. And so, we just, go backwards completely and completely, abandon, any effort because we've decided that it isn't effective. But we're not really giving it a shot unless it's really truly consistent. It would be like, trying to lose weight or, trying to have an exercise program or something, but only doing it once a month or, and then being like, well, clearly this isn't working when really the problem is our own lack of consistency, our own lack of, um, yeah, consistency, I think is the best way of putting it. So we have to identify the kinds of laziness that we are dealing with, and then really try to remind ourselves of the benefits. And even if, you know, we can be consistent for a week or 2 weeks, um, I don't think it takes very long for a person to see benefits from, some benefits, a sense of having more spaciousness in the mind, a sense of, one's kind of day improving, compared to, on a day when you do versus a day when you don't meditate. And then that gives you some encouragement and some reasons to put even more discipline, uh, into your practice. Um, yeah, and then really thinking about, like I said, thinking about what are the things that we are doing in place of our practice, and why are those coming up, and how can we set up our environment, our home life, our family life, whatever it might be. How can we set up a system that's going to help us to overcome those, you know, those other things that are creeping in? Maybe it's setting some expectations with other people about what days and times we are or are not available. And then, not allowing other things to encroach, in that. But just really trying to come up with a game plan that's going to work, that's going to prevent all of these other things that we also need to find time for, but preventing them from just completely crowding out our practice. Okay. All right. Are there any questions about this first obstacle of laziness? So then the second obstacle or hindrance is what's called forgetting the object. So this is, when we are meditating, laziness is something that prevents us from meditating. But then even when we are meditating, there are still hindrances and obstacles that arise. And this is one that is going to arise at that time. And basically, it's completely normal. All of these, we're all ordinary sentient beings. And so none of these are abnormal. None of these are, like I said, these were recognized 2,500, 2,600 years ago as things that everyone is experiencing. But forgetting the object just means that we, when we are meditating, whatever the chosen object is, whether it's analytical in nature or a stabilizing meditation like the sensation of the breath, we're going to have trouble staying on that object. The mind is going to wander, and so the antidote for this, really, what they say is remembering the object, which isn't immediately super helpful. But again, the understanding is that we need to think about sessions of meditation as being distinct or different than, study, than reading, than even contemplating the teachings. We need to think of it as there is an intended object, and anything that isn't the intended object is a distraction. And when I get distracted, my instruction is to notice quickly, as I can, that I have gotten distracted, and then I'm going to move the mind back onto the intended object. And when we do follow that instruction for, many, many months or some years, then over the course of that time, we will notice that this obstacle diminishes, that we stay on the object, more and more for longer periods, and the object, is able to retain more of its vibrancy, its clarity, as compared to before. And there's really no method of doing that other than, again, recollecting that intended object and moving back and then moving back again. And then the mind just kind of gets with the program at some point. It kind of figures out that you don't want it to wander. You're reining it in again and again. And so you make progress in that skill over time. And there are two, in terms of forgetting the object, there's the third obstacle, which is two obstacles, is excitation and dullness. And these are the two main kind of modes that the mind goes to, which result in forgetting the object, in moving away from the intended object, moving toward distraction, moving toward something that's other than the intended object. So with mental excitation, this is kind of an overly, as it says, excitation is an overly bright mind, bright meaning kind of flighty, kind of overly stimulated mind, a mind that is too energetic, that is sort of rapidly moving here and then there. Kind of when they say, oh, my mind was going, a mile a minute, when the mind is just sort of jumping all around. That's mental excitation. So when we realize that that's what's happening, that the mind is, maybe we had too much coffee, or we're anxious about something, or we're just having trouble kind of calming the mind, then we need to bring that down. We need to apply an antidote that's going to lower that energetic state of the mind, so that the mind can be more focused, the mind can be more still. The opposite of that is dullness, mental dullness. And this is as opposed to a very bright, energetic mind, this is a very dull, dark, heavy mind, where we are tending in the direction of drowsiness, of sleepiness, of a real lack of clarity in the mind. So with this being the opposite, then the antidote, the goal would be to raise the energy of the mind, to bring the energy of the mind up, so that we have greater clarity, greater focus in the mind, because we don't want to just kind of space out in our meditation. That's not meditating. Meditating is a very still, concentrated mind, but one that's very focused, one that doesn't, one that isn't just sort of dull and drifting off. Okay, so in terms of how we go about applying those antidotes to excitation or dullness, of course, it begins with recognizing that one or the other is what is arising in the mind. And So this is the skill that we've talked about before, the skill of introspective awareness, having a sense of, kind of one corner of the mind being aware of how the session is going, what's happening in the mind as we attempt to engage in the session of meditation. And this is another skill, that we develop over time, by, again, giving ourselves the instruction that I'm trying to notice the arising of distraction quickly. I don't want to, and again, of course, for quite a while, what is going to happen almost certainly is that time will have elapsed. It could be significant time will have elapsed between the moment that the distraction arises and the moment that we notice that the distraction has arisen, because we've sort of gotten absorbed into that distraction, either because it was, it felt kind of nice and peaceful to have a dull mind, or because there was some story that arose in the mind, that felt important and necessary to kind of follow and elaborate on, because it's new. This is a new, having a boundary to our attention isn't something that we practice a lot. Typically, we do indulge in distraction when it arises, and intentionally not indulging in distraction is a new habit that we have to cultivate. So that's the first is, am I tending toward uh, being overly energetic, or am I tending toward dullness? Because we have to know which of the antidotes to apply to that mental state. If you're tending toward dullness, you wouldn't bring the mind further down. And if you're tending toward excitation, you wouldn't raise the energy of the mind up even further. So, so there are any number of specific things that we can do once we're like, okay, excitation is arising and my mind is just sort of bopping all around and I need to tighten down a little bit. Um, so, one thing that we can do is, um, if that's happening, of course, if if we have a sense that the mind is like that, kind of going into the session, then we can always start with a few minutes of breathing meditation, something that, is kind of grounding, um, you know, sort of um, subtle, where the mind is intent, we're not thinking, we're not kind of using the analytical, conceptual levels of our mind. We're just sort of focused on a sensation. And if we need to, even if we've started the session, um, and there is an analytical object that we're using, we can sort of take a break from that for a couple of minutes, intentionally kind of say, okay, my mind is too, you know, too energetic. So I'm going to do 3 minutes of, focusing on the breath. And then when the 3 minutes are up, I'm going to go back to um, whatever topic, whatever analytical meditation that I was meant to be doing. So that's something that, can certainly help. Another way of starting a session, or again, taking a break if we need to, um, the breath is one object that we can use. We can also use the image, the visualized image of the Buddha above the crown of the head. Um, and if we do that, then in terms of this, if the mind is excited and we're trying to ground the mind, then the specific way that we would visualize the image of the Buddha is to visualize it as quite small, maybe an inch, 2 inches, in height and width. Typically, often you would visualize the Buddha about the size of the palm of your hand, which is maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches, or somewhere in that range. But narrowing that, making that smaller than the normal kind of 4 or 5 inches, making it more like 1 or 2, um, is in a way sort of similar to focusing on the breath, in the sense that it requires, because it's a different mechanism, but the sensation of the breath at the nostrils is a very subtle sensation. And so focusing on it requires a high degree of concentration. And making the image of the Buddha smaller also is going to require a higher degree of concentration, as opposed to larger. And we also, even though when we're meditating on the image of the Buddha, we always visualize it as radiant and composed of light, rather than having a real materiality, in a sort of obstructive sense. If we're using that as an antidote to excitation, we can imbue that image with just a sense of it having weight, even though we don't think of it in a material sense. We can think of it as having a weight to it, and that's just kind of the way that we are engaging with it. Is it is as if it did have weight to it. Thinking of it in that way is another way of um, sort of lowering the energy of the mind and reining in the mind a bit by thinking of it like that. Another visual technique is to focus our attention at the level of the navel. Again, either at the beginning of the session or taking a break, because we've kind of recognized that the session isn't terribly productive due to the arising of excitement, mental excitation. So then we focus our mind at the level of the navel within the body. And we imagine a tiny, like a, a seed or a circle, and, maybe when they say seed, they kind of mean to think of it at, essentially the size of like a grain of rice, or, a mustard seed or something, something really quite small. Again, the purpose of that is that it brings the mind down, and also conjoined with the fact that by concentrating at the level of the navel, you are attending to a lower chakra. And so simply, even though you're not, specifically visualizing the chakra, your mind is being directed toward where, the lower chakras are. And that has the effect of bringing, grounding the mind, and dealing with an excess of energy in the mind. So this seed, we visualize that the top half is white and the bottom half is red. And simply you just concentrate, just like you might concentrate on the image of the Buddha. Here you just try to hold your attention to that image for, again, a couple of minutes, 4 minutes, something like that. And then, check and see if your mind has sort of calmed down a little bit, if the energy of the mind has been brought down. Another thing that we would check if there's excitation is our physical posture. Maybe there's ways of readjusting our physical posture. So if the when we talked about the physical posture, we mentioned that the head should be slightly pointed downward, not, not to where the chin is on the chest or anything, but just ever so slightly having a downward gaze. If we find that what is happening is that the chin is moving upward, and then so our gaze is kind of skyward, that can lead to or be a symptom of having an overly energetic mind. And so readjusting and bringing the head just again slightly downward can address that. Um, and then the last of the antidotes for excitation is to spend a couple of minutes contemplating something that is more serious in terms of an analytical topic, something that like one's own mortality, recognizing that time is short, recognizing that, you know, we could we could pass away even today. We don't know. Um, so thinking about, the uncertainty of, the certainty of death and the uncertainty of the time of death is something that, because if the mind is sort of flighty and going here or there, it's kind of like giving ourselves a kick in the pants when we think, well, but I could die today. I don't know. And so I really have to, deal with this. I really have to kind of get my act together and not be going off on all of these sort of, in the same way that if we're having trouble focusing on something that's due for school or for work, if we think about the consequences of, not getting it done on time or not doing it well, then we can kind of buckle down a little bit when we remind ourselves. And it's sort of the same that, but I think certainly the stakes, from the Buddhist perspective, the stakes are a lot higher than a bad grade or, our boss not being happy or so on, because this is more serious, but kind of the same psychological mechanism at least. Okay, so those are the things that we can do if we notice that excitation is what we are distracted by, if the mind is just sort of going off on all kinds of different tangents. Any questions about excitation or the antidotes? So again, now there's mental dullness. So if we, if the mind feels very heavy, if we're a bit drowsy, if there's a lot of laxity in our concentration, then again, one thing to check is, again, the posture that we are in, but in a different way, because it's quite common that um, our now it could be that our head has dropped too far forward, or we might be slumping over. We might not be maintaining a really straight spine. So that's, it's good with both of these. Of course, we should try to have a general sense of our posture and um, looking at any changes to our posture and then correcting our posture as we're going along. But here what we would do certainly is to straighten the spine a bit, you know, and just sort of maintaining more of the stabilizing muscles, not letting the body kind of slump over. Um, and then, we can also then look at the relationship between the amount of light in the room and what we're doing with our eyes. If we are in a room that's a bit too dark, or if our eyes are too tightly closed, then we can adjust. We can turn on more light, or we could, slightly open our eyes a bit more, so that more basically more light is just entering into our eyes. Because of course we're all accustomed to going to sleep in a dark room. We've trained ourselves to associate, darkness with sleepiness. And that's not what we want when we're meditating. We don't want to have that association causing a problem. So we may need to adjust how much light is coming into the eyes. And yep.
Um, I've noticed that I don't keep my eyes hooded when I meditate. I meditate with my eyes open, but I gaze down. Is that okay? That's what's most comfortable.
Yeah, that's probably, a good way to be doing it. Generally, we don't want to have our eyes totally closed. I mean, if your eyes are completely open, but if you feel comfortable with that, then that's fine. That can be more advanced, but that can also it can be more challenging if they're fully open rather than like half open. Um, but if you're able to kind of reject the visual information that's coming in and still remain focused, then that's actually quite good. Some people do, meditate with their eyes completely open. So I would say completely closed is the one thing that can be problematic. Anything that's not that, I think, is generally probably better.
Okay, thank you.
So another option with the previous visualization of that seed at the navel, instead of just concentrating on it as we did when there was excitation, if there's dullness, then what we can do is we, instead of just concentrating on it at the level of the navel, we can visualize that that seed is rising up. Because again, it's sort of the opposite of um, concentrating the mind on the lower chakras. If we can begin to um, concentrate the mind on the upper chakras, then that will raise the energy of the mind. So we think about this seed at the level of the navel, but then we bring that seed up and we visualize that it shoots out the top of the head. Um, and we want to also kind of associate our mind itself with that seed that we're concentrating on. So um, we imagine that the mind is able to experience um, kind of that trip outside of the body, that the mind is, able to be experiencing kind of the spaciousness and the light that is in the space above the body. And then that is the experience that we want to concentrate on once we've shot that out of the body and it's sort of now like in space above the body. That experience is what we want to concentrate the mind on. Rather than concentrating it at the lower chakra, basically, we're concentrating it at the highest chakras in a way. And then another option is in terms of analytical objects or subjects, rather than something that we find sobering, like we did before, when the mind needed to be brought down. Now the mind needs to be raised. So we think about something that's very uplifting, a very joyful topic, something that really energizes the mind because we're trying to basically counteract sleepiness, dullness, darkness. So we think about something that's very joyful, very pleasant. And then we need to maybe also, as other practical considerations, we, if this is something that's happening often, this kind of dull mind, then probably we need to think a little bit about, are we sleeping, well, and do we have good sleep hygiene? Are we getting enough sleep, enough deep sleep, restorative sleep? Which is a real problem, in our society. People are chronically tired. People are just not um, dealing with that, and so it's, of course, when the mind is relaxed and the body is relaxed, because if a person is chronically sleep deprived, then they're really going to struggle. So that's something that we might have to address. um, and it could also be that some before, if it's maybe after a long day, um, so another thing is, generally, like, when am I meditating in the day? Is it something that am I trying to make something work that isn't really working? And if I were to try a different time, would that be better? And also, if dullness is happening a lot, then maybe some light exercise prior to the session, doing just a little bit of walking, or, some light calisthenics, or, something, akin to yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong or something, some sort of movement that can, again, kind of not heavy exercise, but just kind of something that gets the energy flowing a little bit in the body and the mind. And that can be helpful to sort of shake off any dullness that might be there. So those are just practical things that we should be looking at and that might be helpful. Okay. So, and then the last two obstacles um, are what's called not applying or over applying. So for us, not applying is in terms of not applying the antidotes, I should say. So if we recognize that excitation or dullness is arising in the mind, if we recognize that laziness is a real obstacle, if we recognize that we're constantly forgetting the object, um, but we don't do anything about that, we don't think about, well, okay, I know that this is happening, but I'm not interested in or motivated to actually apply an antidote, then we're not going to get better. Then it's just, we're just sort of allowing those obstacles to be there, and we're not doing anything about them. Over application isn't really an issue. It's for us. It starts to be something that people have to think about when they are at the higher levels of the stages of calm abiding, um, like the seventh, eighth, sixth, seventh, eighth levels of calm abiding. If they've reached that, then for those people, those meditators, it is possible that because they, for a long time, they were looking for distraction, and they were looking for excitation and dullness, and they were kind of vigilant in doing something about the arising of excitation or dullness or what have you. Um, at that level, those obstacles are not arising in the same way that they were before, and that's getting progressively better. So what can happen is that, just due to the force of habit, through years of dealing with distraction, now they kind of don't have to in the same way. So there's a danger that they will tighten down their mind, or they will bring up the energy of the mind when it's really not called for, when the um, the distraction isn't really, they're sort of overcorrecting for what's happening in the mind due to the force of habit over many years of meditating. So that is something that meditators who reach that level have to deal with, but not until then. Really, it's just not applying the antidotes that is relevant for us at the beginner stages. So those are the five um, traditional hindrances, obstacles. And then there's also states of mind that um, that are negative, that um, are responsible. Just like we said, excitation and dullness are, generally the modes of the mind that will cause problems. There are also states of mind that will trigger distraction in different ways. And we also have to be aware of these and dealing with these in general. So the first of these five is what's called attachment. Um, and attachment is, again, one of these really specific sort of technical terms. It doesn't mean like caring about someone or enjoying someone's company or so on. What it refers to is observing. It's a mind that observes an object, and an object can be anything that is outside of oneself. It can be a person, it can be an inanimate object like food, it can be a place like the beach, or whatever place that you go and engage in certain activities. And what any of these objects would have in common with attachment is that the person individually thinks of being in relation to that object as being pleasant, as being enjoyable. So, and not only that, but we then exaggerate the importance of that feeling of enjoyment, that feeling of pleasure that we get from being able to eat the ice cream or go to the place that, where the activities that we enjoy doing are, whatever it might be, talking to our very best friend, whatever it might be. We think that um, being able to contact that object that's pleasurable is kind of the most important thing in our lives, that um, we kind of, in order to be happy, we hold the view that we need to constantly be in contact with these objects of attachment. And these are things that also came up in Buddhism in a nutshell. Um, so what happens, though, is that because attachment is a state of mind that we very easily slip into just in life, then when we try to meditate, objects of attachment will arise. We will think, oh, I wish I was doing this, or going here, or talking to this person, or I'm really excited about later today this, I will see this person at work, or I will hang out with this person tonight. We're going to go see, this new movie. Um, or we think about, oh, today, uh, someone's bringing Thai food over and I really enjoy. And so we kind of daydream about these objects of attachment when we're trying to meditate, right? Because they're pleasure, we see them as pleasurable, and we see them as being responsible for what makes us happy. And so mind gets carried away by these objects of attachment. Anger is the second negative state of mind, and it arises when we try to meditate, often in situations where, maybe that day or the day before, someone or something happened that caused us to be angry, that caused us to kind of think negative thoughts about that person, to have some ill will in our mind because of something that was said or something that was done, and we kind of latch on to that experience, and so again, when the mind begins to get more calm, to get a little bit more subtle, then what can happen very easily is we remember, oh, how dare that person say that thing to me? And then we focus our attention on that story of, when I see them, I'm going to get them back, or, I can't believe I'm going to, you know, call this person and tell them not to talk to that person. All of these stories that we indulge in, because recently, in relation to that session of meditation, um, someone did something that we don't like, um, and then we're going to just focus our mind on that. Pride, here is the third, and really it's often called deluded pride. I think we looked at the distinction between pride and deluded pride, um, in Buddhism in a nutshell. I'm not certain. Sometimes it comes up. Um, so pride, ordinary pride is fine. Is sort of feeling good about an accomplishment. That's no problem. Deluded pride is when we hold ourselves above others on the basis of things that we feel like we have accomplished, or are capable of, or are good at. So it isn't just recognizing, oh, I have this particular skill, but because I think I have this particular skill, I am better than other people, or at least one other person, or what have you. Like, oh, this person at work doesn't know how to do this thing, and I'm very good at it. I should get, you know, more recognition at work, and they should get, you know, fired or whatever. So holding ourselves above other people, it's a comparative mind. It's a mind that, um, isn't just recognizing this is a strength of mine, but thinking, this actually makes me better than others. Um, and certainly, if pride is arising in the mind, then what the reason that that can be a real obstacle is that we might feel like we don't need to learn anything. We might feel like, because I have all of these skills, all of these talents, um, that, I really don't need to spend time thinking about all of these topics, all of this, because I've got it all figured out. I'm very competent in many ways. And so we can close ourselves off from practice, if we are indulging in deluded pride often. Um, so, and then the next, I guess the last is jealousy. Um, so, this is a mind that is coveting, what other people have. Um, and, it could be, envy, jealousy. This is a comparative mind as well. With pride, we were comparing, ourselves with others and thinking, well, I have these qualities and therefore I'm better than others. But here, we kind of think that, um, how dare these other people possess these things? I should possess these things. So it's a mind that isn't rejoicing in the good fortune of others, or the happiness of others, but it wants to appropriate the happiness of others. It doesn't. It's sort of a tight mind, a miserly mind that it isn't interested in the happiness of others, but just, wants more and more, um, happiness for ourselves. Um, so again, these are stories that the mind might ruminate on. Like you hear that this person got a promotion, or you hear that this person got a new car, or, whatever. And if that is a state of mind that you frequently, that, anyone that, that you're energizing a lot, um, then it's going to arise in meditation, and that's going to be the story that you are distracted by, the story of, I can't believe that they promoted that person. I never get promoted. Or I can't believe that my neighbor was able to, put a new deck onto their house, and why can't I never have nice things? I can never do things like that. Um, so we just make ourselves miserable, by indulging in that kind of thinking. Um, and, again, when the mind becomes more subtle as we try to meditate, these are going to bubble up. These sorts of stories are going to bubble up, and they're going to take us away from, these are very powerful states of mind that if we're not trying to work with, none of this, again, these are all normal things. None of this makes anyone monstrous. This Every person, to one degree or another, is dealing with these obstacles. Um, but if we're not trying to make progress in reducing our attachment, our anger, our deluded pride, our jealousy, etc., we're going to um, have trouble in meditation. Um, And then the actual last, I think I said that that was the last, but those are the first four. The fifth is ignorance. And we've talked about ignorance in uh, Buddhism in a nutshell. This is mainly talking about fundamental ignorance, which is the ignorance of not knowing the nature of things, ignorance about the ultimate nature of things. Uh, Not understanding that things exist as dependent arisings, but thinking that things have real, true, findable essence. And this is what really empowers this, as we talked about, before, this afflicted state really is what is the empowering condition of all of the other afflicted states. If we, of course, as we're going along, we should be trying to, apply conventional, what they might call conventional antidotes to pride, to hatred or anger, or, you know, um, because, with pride, for example, the conventional antidote would be to contemplate all of the things that you do not know, all of the things that you are not good at. So a person might be an accountant, or they might be an airline pilot, or, they might be excellent at math. And so they're kind of really excited about, oh, I'm really competent in this and this. But it's also true that for any of us, there are hundreds or even thousands of things that we have no competency in. If we needed to repair, some sort of mechanical thing, maybe we absolutely couldn't. If someone was choking, maybe we wouldn't have any idea of the appropriate way to respond with the Heimlich maneuver. Or if someone had gone into cardiac arrest, maybe we would totally fall apart and not have any idea how to be helpful. And of course, there's many topics, many philosophical topics within Buddhism that we maybe haven't studied at all and don't know anything about. So recollecting that that is true, that yes, maybe I do know how to do this and I do know how to do that, but if I were put into thousands of other scenarios where something was going wrong, or someone needed to apply some specific skill or knowledge that I don't know anything about, I would be helpless. I would be totally useless. in that scenario, because that scenario doesn't call for the competencies that I do possess. It calls for totally different set of skills and knowledge. That is something that conventionally can reduce our pride, our deluded pride, by just having a more realistic and balanced view. With anger, you don't do that. Thinking about all of the things that you don't know isn't necessarily helpful when you're angry at someone. Um, when you're angry at someone, trying to remember that they've been kind in the past, or trying to remember that there are many people, who they do show great kindness to, and maybe you caught them, on a bad day or in a bad moment, but they show kindness to many people most of the time. That is something that can affect whether or not anger is actually arising in your mind at that moment. So those are conventional antidotes. They are useful in tamping down the arising of those afflicted states as they're arising. Ultimately, though, as we said in Buddhism in a nutshell, it's wisdom realizing the nature of reality that overcomes all of the afflicted states, because all of the afflicted states have in common exaggeration and layering on top of what's there with things that are not there. Thinking of things as being solid and findable and real and concrete in ways in which they're not. So if and when we overcome fundamental ignorance, then all of the pride and jealousy and anger, all of them they all evaporate. And so that's the real goal. But it's necessary as we're going along, not to indulge in anger when it arises, to apply conventional antidotes to anger when it arises, to apply conventional antidotes to pride, deluded pride when it arises, and so on, so that the mind is, reined in and, not just fully absorbed into the arising of these negative mental states as we're progressing more and more into having that wisdom realizing the nature of reality.
So all of these are hindrances when they're upsetting to the point that they come up during your meditation.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say upsetting in the sense that, like, in terms of like an emotion, like, but they are going to empower distraction. They're necessarily going to cause some agitation in the mind, because so the distinction that I'm trying to make is that it can feel, for us subjectively, we may not have any problem with it, right? We might be really happy to be absorbed into daydreaming about an object of attachment, or we may be really happy because in a way it's kind of a release, right? I mean, what we're trying to do is we're trying to hold the mind onto a single object without distraction. Like, that's the ultimate goal. It takes a really long time to reach that goal, but it 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 isn't natural. That's not something, because it's going to take a really long time to reach that goal. That implies that it isn't something that comes easily to us, and it isn't something that we have a great deal of existing familiarity with. So it can feel nice to get away from that, but we really shouldn't. If we're taking things seriously, and we really do we're really dedicated, and we're really truly invested in our practice and in getting the results of our practice, then necessarily we have to set things up in a way where um, it, you know, where we make progress in mental stability and clarity and so on. So there are hindrances in the sense that that goal is made more difficult. Uh, Even though in the moment we might kind of think of it as a respite from that task, and we might welcome that respite. We should try to maybe not think about it in that way and really think, well, my real goal, is kind of like if you're really trying to be healthy, for a long period of time and you're really watching things and then you go to a party and it's like, oh, I can kind of let this go. That's okay maybe that one time, but if that mindset then becomes the dominant mindset, then that goal that you had of, really being in peak physical condition or whatever, that mindset is going to really undermine that goal. So it's kind of, they're hindrances in the sense that they make that goals more difficult to obtain.
Because all of these five that we just went over, I experience them not in meditation. I don't really, I'm more likely to forget the object during
Mhm.
meditation, not to be thinking about any of these other things. But I do relate to the five hindrances, all of those. I really relate to, but the five we just went over, I
Mhm.
experienced them, just not during meditation.
Well, yeah, I mean, people are different, and so
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Let's- Any other thoughts or questions? Well, I think that was mainly what I wanted to cover for today. Maybe I spoke quickly. Is there anything that would be helpful to go over or?
Um, I pretty much learned a lot. Especially last class, I learned a lot. Um, and I've been over these before. Mm, um, I needed to hear them again. So, but yeah. Um, I noticed they set a date for discovering Buddhism.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll kick
that's
it off.
cool.
Kick it off in July.
Yeah, I saw that. Do you know, are those small classes or are those bigger than these classes? Because these classes have just been a couple people.
Yeah, I mean, it varies. Hopefully, and of course, it's a 2-year program, and so, it tends to maybe start off more than it ends up, because at some point, people don't necessarily feel as comfortable joining, toward the end if they're new. Certainly we're hoping, for something like 10 or 15 people would be what we would be hoping for.
Do you know if, or is it dependent on the teacher, if we can raise our hands during the class or if they want the questions at the end? Do you know how they do it?
Yeah, I mean, it really does depend on,
The
um,
teacher, right?
yeah, 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 people, everybody's kind of different about. I
Okay,
would
I
say,
understand.
I would say that, I mean, if they don't specifically say, then I don't think that there's anything, you know, I would say that if you have a question, if a question comes up, then certainly use the raise hand icon and then just see what happens.
See
They
what
might,
happens.
yeah, they might say, let's please hold questions until the end, because, one reason that they might say that is because they might say something later that's going to answer maybe that question. And
That
you know
question.
um but if they don't, but I think it's good, but the danger is that you might forget your question and you don't want that to
No.
happen. So I would just say go ahead and just try and then see what they say. And no one's
Okay.
going to be upset if someone raises their
Okay.
hand. And if they start off the class with it with clear, then you might have to just write down the question. But um,
Okay. I went to the retreat this weekend.
great.
Yeah, it was pretty much life-changing.
Yeah,
That's the second retreat I've ever done.
Venerable
So
Release is amazing.
I really like retreats. I've been to two now and they're just really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Venerable Verbena is doing two more in May. So we've got in 2 weeks and then the week after. So more opportunities coming.
Is she doing a full weekend retreat or just a full day retreat?
Yeah, no, full weekends, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday on
You know the date of that one?
yeah, there's two, the 10th, 11th, and 12th, and then the 17th, 18th, and 19th.
Okay, I'm out of town for the first one, but I'd like to make the next one. So thanks for telling me about it. And is that going to be similar to Venerable Renee's in terms of like some teaching and a little bit of meditation? Because he did a lot more teaching than I expected
Mhm.
versus teaching to meditation ratio. Is that going to be similar or you're unsure?
Uh, Venerable Rabina, I would say that her style is probably not a lot of meditation. I mean, there's
Okay.
two. So the Mahamudra, the first one that the death one, I would say probably,
Mahamudra is the first one?
yeah, I think so. I could have them reversed.
No, it is. I saw it. I
Um,
saw the Saturday one was
yeah.
Mahamudra, but the second one is on death, you said?
Yeah.
Oh no. I don't know that I want to do that one. Yeah, I don't know that I want to do that one. I might just do the her her um I might just do the recordings and do it
Mhm.
a week late or something. Do
Sure.
they make recordings that well that I could do it a whole week late?
Yeah, I mean, it should be. I mean, we do sometimes have. I know I feel bad because like there was like an hour of Venerable Renee's retreat that didn't get recorded because they just forgot to turn the recording back on.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing can happen. So I feel bad when that happens for people. But yeah, I mean, everything is on YouTube. So within a few days.
Okay. I'll think about the death one. I have to think about it. I might just wet my toes and go to it, and then if it's totally like too much for me, I might just not stay. So,
Yeah, of course. Yeah, come to whatever you can.
yeah, cool. So, I really enjoyed your classes. So, thank you for teaching me.
Sure.
Cool. So, I'll see you. You'll teach some of the Discovering Buddhism classes, right?
Um, I probably won't do a full module at any point. I
Okay.
may do, I probably will do some of the retreat days, which are optional, but because we're discovering Buddhism, and we'll probably be making that more clear at some point. We're pretty focused. We have this highest yoga tantra initiation coming up in a couple weeks, and that's just taking a lot of our focus and attention to kind of get
Yeah.
through. Um,
Yeah.
but for discovering Buddhism, people can take it just kind of casually, or they can take it for certification. And the
Yeah.
retreat days are required for certification, but they're also just something that a person could still do, even if they were, not. So some of the retreat days I'll probably be doing, but I won't be doing any of the full modules. And we have
Do
access
you
to
know do you know what
better
the
teachers.
retreat topics are for the Discovering Buddhism one?
So basically, in all of the modules have meditations that are part of each of the modules. And they should all be introduced by the teacher over the 6 weeks of the um, of each individual module. And then the retreat day is basically just an opportunity to engage in those same meditations, in a over the course of one day, like four
Oh,
or
so
five.
it's a 1 day retreat
Yeah,
from each module has a 1 day retreat associated.
yeah, yeah.
That sounds pretty cool. That sounds doable.
Yeah, it's gonna be like 10 to 3:30 with a lunch break. Yeah.
Okay. So you might lead one of those, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I'll do
Okay,
over the 2 years, I'll probably do a few. Yeah.
cool. That sounds cool. All right. All right. Well, I guess we're gonna end early, so
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, have a good weekend.
yeah, you too. Thanks again. And
Yep.
I'll see you about.
All right. All right.